Beyond the Book with Julie is an opportunity and an invitation for you to learn about authors, not about their books, but about their backstory. Find out what compelled them to write these books, find out what their journey's been like, build that personal connection so that when you do get to the book, you already know the author.
Today is the day we have Andrew Morton in the house, and it is a packed house this morning. Let's go check it out. Meet the Queen. I'm sure you already know her. All right, Andrew Morton is a world famous biographer. Excuse me about that. He's written so many books about the British and the European royals, but he's also written a lot of books about the Hollywood celebs like Tom Cruise and Angelina Jolie and many, many others. Today, we are focusing on two of his books, Diana, Her True Story, and Meghan, A Hollywood Princess. Oops. But anyways, in Beyond the Book with Julie, we go beyond the book. This is not about having read the book, but it's more about getting to know the author and finding out details about why he chose to write these books and stories that you won't find in the books. So let's get started. Tell us, Megxit, everyone wants to know. What's your take?
Well, ladies, you should be tuning in to the Ellen show at some stage in the future because she's going to do an interview with Ellen. The interesting thing is she met Ellen at a dog refuge place in Los Angeles, and Ellen said, "Take that dog," and the dog was Bogart, one of her first rescue dogs. And since then, they've become kind of internet email pals. So she snagged the first interview. So she'll be able to discuss why life in Britain was so awful for her, why she's decided to leave the royal family, and why Harry is thrilled that he's leaving the royal family, feels kind of liberated. My own take on it is that I think it was a bit premature. They didn't give it long enough. I mean, Diana spoke to me 10 years after she'd been in the royal family. And that was when her husband was effectively living with another man's wife, Camilla Parker Bowles. And so she was in kind of despair. This is a couple who are obviously happy together, but they just don't like everything that comes with being royal. The photographers, the microphones, and all the rest of it. The irony is, I was contacted the other day by a blog saying, "Do you know of any paparazzi pictures of Meghan and Harry taken in London?" And there are none. If you look, there are no pictures. So my first question to them would be, what are you complaining about? Because Diana, because Diana in her day, and she used to speak to me about this, she used to be chased down the street. I mean, if those of you who've got Diana, Her True Story, will see pictures of her being chased down the street when she's gone to, say, San Lorenzo's for lunch.
But is this really what's bothering them, the media, or is it that they wanted to leave the royal family to pursue really more media, but be paid for it?
No, I think that Harry has made it clear that they wanted to serve, and and this is the other aspect of it. Remember, in their first statement a couple of weeks ago, they said they wanted to collaborate with the Queen. Well, you don't collaborate with the Queen, you just do what you're told by the Queen. and they had this idea that you could be half in and half out of the royal family, that you could do some royal engagements but not others. And quite frankly, being half in and half out is a bit like being half in and half out of the mafia. You're either in it or you're not, or you're not half pregnant and half not pregnant. And so their decision to depart the royal family was based on a false premise. And so that was made perfectly clear to them during the negotiations with the Queen's representatives, that they had to give up all their royal functions. And what will have hurt Harry the most, because he's a military man, he fought in Afghanistan, was giving up his military positions, giving up his commander-in-chief of several regiments and outfits. I think he's the Captain General of the Royal Marines. So what have they emerged with? Nothing. They're now Mr. and Mrs. Mountbatten Windsor. I wish them well, and I hope that they do well. And so the next question is really, he said he wants to remain British. She's American. To stay in Canada for any length of time, they're going to have to get visas. You can only stay there for 6 months. So how are they going to do all this? Because he wants to live back in Britain. She's becoming a British citizen. So it seems to me that the best way for them to proceed would be for them both, for her to remain American, and for him to get a green card and come and live in San Marino.
And what would they do here? Work at Tree Rose Cottage?
They'd go to Rose Tree Cottage for afternoon tea, and they'd listen to Julie talking about the royal family. Watch her podcast.
Oh, they could come to the parties and take pictures with all of you.
You think I'm joking? Where was Meghan? Where did she start? Here. Who was her first boyfriend? Louis Surrota
at LaSalle, right? St. Francis.
Pasadena Avenue. Yeah.
Right.
You know, where was she homecoming queen? La Cañada.
St. Francis.
Where did she go to learn how to drink English tea? Rose Tree Cottage. This place is the center of the universe. This is Meghan Central. So, and also, where do other celebrities live? Well, maybe not so much in San Marino or Pasadena, but certainly in Hollywood, and in, so this area would seem to me very suitable.
Okay.
So any realtors here, start the rumors now.
I'm sure they will. All right, 1 year ago, you on Sky News said that Meghan is smart enough to understand you don't come into an institution like the monarchy, which has been around for 1,000 years, and throw your weight around. You sit still, you wait, you listen, you take notes.
Yeah,
It's been less than 2 years since she married.
Yeah. Well, she didn't sit still, take notes, and she came in
Are
like
you
a
shocked?
world. I'm surprised that they didn't give it longer. I'm sure that everybody else here is, because it's like anything, like a marriage, like a new job. You've got to give it some time to bed down. I mean, the royal family is a tricky family to understand. And I was talking to one of Diana's bodyguards a couple of months ago, and we said exactly the same thing. It's a difficult family to get involved in. For Meghan, she didn't know anything about the royal family at all. I mean, if you look at some of the early videos of her when she was on Suits, and she did some of these promotional things, and there was one question: who do you prefer, Harry or William? And it was an audience like this. She went, I don't know. And then the interviewer said, try Harry, he's single. Oh, all right. So she said Harry. And then there was a question about, what are the national flags of Britain? England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. And she didn't know. I mean, I'm sure that many people here don't know. In many respects, she did everything right. She had a baby. It's a boy. She got herself a house, did it up. She did royal engagements. She made speeches. Far better speech maker than say Diana was. Diana was always nervous about giving speeches, and Meghan was very articulate. She knows her own mind. She's been an activist before, and I just don't think they give it the time that they should have done. And well, I wish them well. I'm sure everybody here wishes them well, but I have my doubts that it's all good, that it might not end in tears.
You mentioned, I saw you in an interview a few days ago, and you mentioned that you think that they're both being very short-sighted and they're only thinking in the short term. But is Meghan only thinking in the short term, or did she marry Prince Harry with really a long-term vision that may or may not include him, but would help her career?
Well, Julie, I'm
just asking, what do you think?
Look at that. Look at the audience. The interesting thing about Meghan is that she was an activist. When I say activist, she tried to do the right thing as a child, as a youngster. She helped out at soup kitchens in downtown LA. She stood up to bullies at school. She had what I would call a proper moral compass. She knew the difference between right and wrong. Her mother inculcated that in her. She had talent. She was doing all right before Harry, by the way. She had her own capsule fashion collection. She represented World Vision Canada. She had spoken at the UN. She rubbed shoulders with various the great and the good.
So she could just miss all that,
So I think it's really cynical to say she's doing this to further her own ends because she's going to get divorced and then she can make a fortune. I mean, you sound like the editor of the Daily Mail.
I'm just asking. And
But
did you work for the tabloids
I have to say, that, of course I did. It's a rite of passage. The point about Meghan and about Harry is that they wanted to serve. And it's interesting that Meghan, she embraced the Grenfell survivors, the terrible tower block fire that we had in Britain. She did the cookbook. She really got stuck in and got involved. And I thought, good on you, girl. And I think that the criticism of her was unwarranted. An awful lot of it was. Mm-hmm. I think that, and having got to know Diana quite well, she had the same issues. So when people say, oh, well, it was racism, well, it wasn't racism with Diana. It's more sexism than racism. It's more the fact that she's an art, that the British media, and I would say the world media really, have difficulty in bringing on board articulate, strong, independent women. And that's what Diana was, and that's what Meghan was. And she, if you just go along with the status quo, you can get by. But if you stand out there, right, you get hammered. So I think that she got a lot of flack very early on. She thought that she was going to get a honeymoon. She said this with the media. Her honeymoon lasted about 4 seconds. I mean, they were at her. And the difference is, I mean, Diana, she was inside the royal family for what? A year and a half, 2 years before the sniping started. She was called a fiend, and she was called a monster. She was blamed for Tina Brown, who ran Tatler at that stage, said that she was the mouse that roared, that she'd kicked out all of Prince Charles's bodyguards, private secretaries, and so on, and she ruled the roost. Well, at the time, she was suffering from an eating disorder, bulimia nervosa. She was feeling suicidal. The last thing she was asserting herself inside the royal family. So I find it interesting. And by the way, same thing happened to Fergie. Fergie's a different character, ebullient, full of noisy, brash. And after a couple of years, she felt like she wanted to hide under a pile of blankets. So that's what happens to you inside. When you get into this pressure cooker with the media watching you. And the difference is between Diana and Fergie and even Sophie Rhys-Jones, Countess of Wessex, and Meghan and Kate, is that there was no social media in those days.
Right, that's true.
There's social media now, so every single one of you can put a little post about, I hate Meghan, she's this, that, and the other, and it builds up to the point where staff at Kensington Palace, at Buckingham Palace, had to go through their different accounts, just getting rid of the trolls. And there's a bigger issue about social media because it's the wild west of opinions, and people take a really strong position on somebody and an abusive position of somebody that they've never met. I mean, which I find extraordinary.
But talk about, you mentioned before, and I want this audience to hear, the differences between Meghan and Kate and their introduction to the royal family, and how you thought for Kate it was actually harder than for Meghan.
Well, you've got to, yes, the logic is this. William and Kate were dating at college. Everybody at Buckingham Palace, all the people that I know, the courtiers, thought that it would end at the end of college, and that essentially she was there to keep him anchored, because he had what's called what they refer to in the palace as a wobble in his first term at St Andrews University. He wanted to quit university and just go back home. He was homesick, and by the way, Prince Charles had the same problem, and they all do, because they're cosseted at home. And then William and Catherine split up, if you may remember, for a few weeks. And Catherine, very clever lady, she looked great. She was all smiles. She was attending. She was going clubbing. She was going to book launches. She was wearing short skirts, high heels. She looked fabulous. And William thought, yeah, I'm missing something. And he got back together with her. But in the intervening few weeks, people at the palace were saying, well, is she right for you, sir? And this kind of thing, because she was the daughter of a former airline stewardess and a British Airways manager. Her great grandfather was a miner. So she was a commoner. And inside the royal family, they've always thought, you're going to marry the daughter or the son of an earl or a duke. And so there was a bit of resistance to Kate, and there was a lot of snide remarks made by William's friends talking about Dorst Emanuel when they were talking about Carol Middleton, Kate's mother. Now, that relationship, as we know, survived and thrived, and she's a glossy, beautiful young woman who has had the support of her family, and that's really, really crucial. So let's move on to Meghan. Well, Meghan's had a great lot of support from her family, hasn't she? Jeez, you wouldn't want them in watching you back, would you? But inside the royal family, Harry did not put a cigarette paper between himself and Meghan. From the get-go, she was the one. There was no room for doubt. And when William voiced his doubts, that was what started the rift between them, because he said, do you think that she's right for you? And basically said, I'm not so sure. She might not be able to cope with this. Because she's a divorcee herself. She's American. She's biracial. She's not your normal royal bride. And even Kate looks more of a conventional royal bride, even though she's a commoner, than Meghan. And Harry refused to countenance any kind of distance or any kind of criticism of Meghan. And so they went down that road without any kind of feedback from officials at the palace.
Right, so he didn't take any negativity, and
none at all, absolutely none. And if anybody even raised an eyebrow, and they must have raised an eyebrow, because they dated at Soho House for a couple of nights, and they had 2 dates, and he said, do you want to come to Botswana for a week with me? And so she ended up going to Botswana, and it always makes me smile.
So what's next? What's next for them? What do you think? Where do you think we'll see them?
Well, they'll be coming round here.
But to do what? What will they be doing? They already have...
Okay, this is what I think I see them, and my crystal ball sees them doing things like the Obamas, which is to say, start their own production company, make documentaries about, shall we say, worthy or interesting things, not about themselves, like the Obamas have made one about a factory, I think in Iowa or something like that. And they will use their contacts in Hollywood. And Vancouver Island, there's not that many producers live there, not that many directors. So I think they'll end up coming down here and there's a lot more big names down here, so they will fit in.
Well, we're going to move on. Or did you want to say one more thing?
they're pals with Oprah and George Clooney. So.
Right. Well, were they pals? One more question. Were they pals with George Clooney and Oprah before the wedding, or how did they get on the guest list? Because they're who they are?
Exactly. I found that very interesting. On the wedding day, I thought it was almost like Meghan had brought in her own court of people that she thought would be useful to her in the going forwards. And it is interesting that when she's been attacked, who stood up for her? Oprah, George Clooney, the Beckhams, and others. So people that she's not used very much, she's used as her celebrity cohort.
Right. I think she's very smart.
I think it's
thinking for the long term.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Princess Diana. Princess Diana, how did you get her true story? Why did she decide to entrust you with all of her information?
Well, I'd been writing about the royal family for a few years, and I knew Diana, vaguely. I'd met her at various cocktail parties and so on, and we'd always had a fairly fun relationship. Everything was kind of light, bright, and trite. And I'm 6'4", she's 5'10". She could wear heels, and I could still look down on her. So she liked that. She always looked down on Prince Charles because he was a little bit shorter than her by a whisker. Anyway, I was writing a book about her, a biography, and we had a very good friend in common, a chap called James Coulthurst, who used to have lunch with her, and they were good friends, and he was a good friend of mine. He was a contact, and I was building up a contact. And he told Diana about the fact that I was doing this book, and she knew that I was writing favourable things about her, and she passed on a couple of stories. One about the fact that Prince Charles had sacked his private secretary. She asked me advice on how to get rid of her hairdresser, who wasn't doing a very good job, and she wanted to get a new one, and she wanted to get rid of the hairdresser without him going to the newspapers and selling his story. So I said, well, write him a long letter, give him a nice gift, a generous gift, and say you've decided to move on. And he accepted that, and he never said a word. So Diana thought, oh well, Andrew Morton can.
Right.
He's saying things. And what I didn't know as well, she hated everybody inside the royal family. She hated the men in grey. She had, she was considering, shall I walk out of the royal family? A bit like Meghan did, shall I walk out of the royal family? And James said, look, why don't you explain your case through a book? And she thought about this for a while and said, yeah, does Andrew want an interview? Well, back in 1991, that was unthinkable. I mean, those of you of a certain age will remember that Diana was kind of this princess on a pedestal, never said anything, always just looked glamorous and silent. And here she was offering me an interview. Well, I thought at the time it was going to be an interview. It was going to be, she was going to talk about her humanitarian mission, about what she wants to do for her charity work and going forward. Well, I was dead wrong. I went to meet James in a cafe in North London, in a place called Ruislip in North London. And he had this tape recorder and he had this pair of headphones. And I put these headphones on, and he put the on-off switch on. And there was Diana talking about, her desperation inside the royal family, her eating disorder, a woman called Camilla Parker Bowles, never heard of her, and her suicide attempts. It was like it was almost like a prisoner in a cell gabbling to get their story out, because she spoke really quickly. And it was after I put the headphones down, it was like, I talk about sliding doors. It was like entering another world, like entering a parallel universe, a bit like the Watergate thing, where they realised that they had a secret, and the secret was, he could harm them. And so when I went back home on the subway, I just stood right at the back of the well behind the line, and then I went to see my publisher, a chap called Michael O'Mara, who's American from Pennsylvania, and he's a big cigar smoker, and he puffed on his cigar and said, Andrew, if she was so unhappy, how come she's always smiling? And this was the kind of conundrum that I had to solve. How do you explain to the wider world that what you're saying is true when all the mood music shows this is someone who is, seems to be happy, is happily married. The idea of the Prince and Princess of Wales separating or divorcing was utterly unthinkable. Almost like having a property magnate as a president of the United States.
Well, and you got a lot of flack for writing the book, and the press was after you, and people tried to say that it wasn't a true story. Did you ever think to yourself, why did I do that?
The one thing I've never, ever regretted for a living second is doing the book. I mean, I would hate to be the guy who hadn't done the book.
Right.
So yes, I took a lot of flack. I mean, there were death threats, all kinds of stuff. Because at the time, people thought, oh, I was attacking Diana. I wasn't. I was trying to explain her personality.
Right. Wow, what an upstanding guy you are.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. Have you ever met Prince Harry or Prince William?
No.
Did they ever write to you?
No. I've always been curious to find out why, because you'd think they might want a copy of the tapes because it's her voice. And remember, at the time, she was what, 35? No, sorry, 30. And I thought that the great regret I have is that I didn't keep a really detailed diary of that time, because it's now a part of history. So I really regret, first of all, not meeting her during the process. But the reason why I didn't meet her during the process is because it was too dangerous. And it meant that she couldn't say, I didn't meet Andrew Morton. And also, back to sliding doors again, the weird thing was this really persistent paparazzi photographer. His girlfriend lived in the same street as James. Now, James, in the days of public telephones, I used to ring James up on the public telephone from the end of his street and say, is this guy Jason Fraser, is he around? And he'd look out of his curtain and say no. And then on one occasion, I was transcribing these tapes in James's house, and I knock on the door, and it's Jason Fraser. So I get up, and I'm hiding in the curtains like this, and he's at the door. So we realized that this could go very badly wrong very quickly. So the sensible thing was not to meet her. What I wish I had done was, after the book came out, the problem was I was then well known, so to have met her would have caused a problem.
Right.
So, it's one of those things you look back and you think, how could you have done it slightly differently? My one big regret was not making a more really detailed diary. It was fairly detailed, but not detailed enough.
So my final question about Diana is, what do you think she would want to say to Prince Harry and Prince William today regarding their rift, their marriages, their lives?
Well, I think I know this for a fact. I mean, she used to say to me, Harry is a backup in the nicest possible way. That's to say, they're a team, because, and she knew, I mean, she made a real strong point about this, that Fergie had 2 girls, Princess Margaret had a boy and a girl, the Wessexers had a boy and a girl. She was the only one with 2 boys, and she felt that they were there for a reason, that Harry was there to be the wingman to William. And she would be very upset now, I'm sure, the fact that William and Harry have this rift, because she saw them as the future of the family. She saw William as the future of the family, and Harry very much the person who kept him on the right track. So yeah, I think she'd be a very unhappy princess today. Well, we're going to go forward to you. You are a neighbor here in Pasadena. How did that come about? Well, I met girl called Carolyn May, who's now Carolyn Morton, my wife. It wasn't a blind date. I was helping this guy write his biography. I had a few weeks here. It's warmer here than it is in London sometimes. And we met over dinner. And so I ended up dating her long distance. And it's useful being a writer. You can just put some papers together and have computer will travel. Okay. So that's why I live half the year here and half the year in London.
Which do you prefer?
Well, with a room full of beautiful ladies, what do you think?
Britain, right?
You're all snark, aren't you? You should be working for the British tabloids.
Well, that would be fun. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. It has been great to hear your insights and all of the details, everything you know. Thank you for sharing.